The dust motes danced like frantic fairies in the single beam of light slicing through the grimy window of the forgotten train station. It was a place where time had stopped, where the ghosts of 1,000 farewells lingered in the air. But for a single mom and her young son, it was a new beginning, a place of hope. They didn't know it yet, but they were standing on the precipice of a discovery that would change their lives forever. A discovery that was hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to find it. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The City Hall auction room was a sterile, soul-crushing box of fluorescent light and beige walls. The air, thick with the cloying scent of stale coffee and the dry, papery smell of aging documents, felt heavy in Clara's lungs. She sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. Beside her, her 8-year-old son, Leo, had finally succumbed to the room's oppressive boredom. His head, with its unruly mop of brown hair, rested against her arm. His worn teddy bear, Barnaby, clutched loosely in his hand. He was the only spot of warmth and life in this cold, official place. Clara smoothed his hair, her gaze sweeping over the assembly of bidders. They were a flock of vultures in cheap suits and sensible shoes, their faces impassive, their eyes sharp and calculating. They were here for foreclosed properties, seized assets, the unfortunate remnants of other people's broken dreams. Clara felt a pang of kinship with the unseen former owners, a shared vulnerability that made her skin prickle. Then she saw him holding court near the front. Mr. Henderson. He was a man carved from predatory confidence, his suit impeccably tailored, his silver hair swept back from a tanned, unlined forehead. He wasn't just a vulture, he was the king of them, a developer known for raising history to make way for glass and steel monoliths that scraped the sky and bled the character from the city. He laughed at something his associate, a younger, leaner version of himself, had said, the sound a low rumble of self-satisfaction that grated on Clara's nerves. He was everything she wasn't, secure, powerful, and utterly dismissive of the past. And now, the auctioneer's voice boomed, startling Leo awake. We moved to Lot 37, the old Crestwood station. He droned on, his tone flat and disinterested, rattling off the property details. A relic of a bygone era sold as is, where is. The city makes no warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the structural integrity or habitability of the premises. His words painted a bleak picture of decay and neglect, of a liability rather than an asset. A slide flickered onto the screen at the front of the room, showing the station in its current state. A forlorn brick shell with boarded-up windows and a clock tower whose hands were frozen, like a broken promise, at 3:15. A few people in the room chuckled. Clara's heart gave a painful lurch. She didn't see a ruin. She saw the place where her own grandfather, a man she'd only known through sepia-toned photographs, had left for a war he never returned from. She saw the place where, as a little girl, her mother had taken her to watch the great silver trains thunder past, their whistles a song of distant places and grand adventures. It was a place of memories, a place with a soul. Mr. Henderson didn't see a soul. He saw a bargain, a pile of bricks and pigeon droppings. He declared loudly to his associate, ensuring the whole room could hear his contempt. He raised a lazy finger. I'll give them $10 for the land. The auctioneer, unsurprised, began his rhythmic chant. I have a bid of $10. $10 for lot 37. Do I hear 11? $10 going once. The words were a countdown to demolition. Clara could feel it. Henderson would tear it down, pave over the memories, and erect another soulless condominium. A desperate, reckless impulse surged through her, a current of defiance against the exhaustion that had been her constant companion for years. It was the same impulse that had made her pack up their lives after her husband left, the same stubborn hope that had carried her through lean months and lonely nights. She had exactly $12 in her purse, money earmarked for their dinner. Her hand, trembling, rose of its own accord. $11. Her voice, though quiet, sliced through the monotonous drone of the auction. It was thin and reedy, but it was clear. The room fell utterly silent. The auctioneer paused, his mouth slightly agape. Every head in the room turned, 100 pairs of eyes fixing on the single mother in the worn denim jacket. Clara's face burned, a hot tide of mortification and adrenaline rising from her chest. Leo looked up at her, his eyes wide, a mixture of confusion and dawning pride shining in their brown depths. He squeezed her hand. Mr. Henderson turned slowly, a look of mild irritation mixed with amusement on his face. He sized her up in a single, dismissive glance, taking in her frayed cuffs and the determined set of her jaw. He saw no threat, only a fool. He gave a small, condescending shrug, a gesture that said, "Let her have the pile of junk." He turned back to his associate, already dismissing her, already moving on to the next, more profitable conquest. Sold! The auctioneer's gavel cracked down, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. To the young lady in the back for $11. The weight of it, the sheer, terrifying reality of what she had just done, settled on Clara's shoulders as she walked to the front of the room. Her legs felt like lead. She signed the papers, her hand shaking so badly she could barely form her own name. The clerk slid the deed across the counter, a single sheet of paper that declared her the owner of a dilapidated, forgotten train station. She paid her $11, the last of her cash, and walked out of the city hall, clutching the deed in one hand and Leo's small, trusting hand in the other, stepping out of the stale, recycled air and into the bright, uncertain sunlight. The drive to the station was a blur of suburban streets giving way to older, more neglected roads. With every mile, Clara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of "what have I done?" She had spent their dinner money on a ruin, a beautiful, sentimental ruin, but a ruin nonetheless. Yet, when they finally turned onto the overgrown lane that led to the property, a different feeling began to bloom in her chest, something fragile and green, like the wildflowers pushing their way through the cracks in the asphalt. And then they saw it. The photograph at the auction had not done it justice. It was a grand old dame of a building, even in its decay. The brickwork, though crumbling in places, was a deep, rich red, and the arched windows, though boarded and blind, hinted at a former elegance. The clock tower rose against the afternoon sky, a silent, stoic sentinel. It wasn't just a pile of bricks. It was a story waiting to be read. "Wow," Leo breathed, his face pressed against the car window. "It's a castle, Mom." Clara laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound that felt foreign and wonderful. "Not quite a castle, sweetie, but it's ours." She parked the car, and before she could even turn off the engine, Buddy, their loyal light brown Labrador, began to whine and scrabble at the back door, his tail thumping a frantic rhythm against the seat. He could sense the wide-open space, the world of new smells that awaited him. The moment Leo opened the door, Buddy bounded out, a streak of golden-brown fur, and began to race around the overgrown platform, his joyful barks echoing in the vast, empty silence. His pure, uncomplicated happiness was infectious. Clara grabbed a crowbar from the trunk of her car, feeling a surge of proprietary determination. She approached the massive double doors of the main entrance. They were weathered to a silvery gray, a heavy chain and a rusted padlock holding them shut. After a moment of wrestling with the chain, she wedged the tip of the crowbar into the jamb. She put her shoulder into it, grunting with the effort. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening screech of tortured metal and a groan of splintered wood, the lock gave way and one of the heavy doors swung inward, opening a dark maw into the station's heart. A wave of air, cool and musty, washed over them, carrying the scent of damp earth, decay, and a century of trapped silence. Clara hesitated on the threshold, a feeling of awe and trepidation washing over her. This was it. This was her $11 castle. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, Leo and Buddy close at her heels, leaving the bright afternoon sun behind and entering the echoing world of the past. The main hall was cavernous, larger than she could have ever imagined. It was a cathedral of departures and arrivals. High above, the arched ceiling was lost in shadows, but shafts of afternoon light sliced down from the grimy clerestory windows, illuminating swirling galaxies of dust motes. The floor was a mosaic of broken tiles, old newspapers yellowed to the color of parchment, and the general detritus of decades of neglect. Pigeons cooed from the high rafters, their soft calls the only sound besides the crunch of broken glass under their feet. Nature was already reclaiming the space, with tenacious green vines snaking their way through cracks in the walls and small, resilient wildflowers sprouting from the dirt-filled crevices of the platform edge. Their footsteps echoed, loud and intrusive in the profound silence. Buddy, momentarily subdued by the scale of the place, stayed close to Leo, his nose twitching, cataloging the library of new smells. It was both thrilling and daunting. A palpable sense of history permeated the air, the faint, ghostly energy of the millions of lives that had passed through this very hall, each with a story, a destination, a hope, or a heartbreak. Clara felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a sacred space. But then she remembered the deed in her jacket pocket. It wasn't trespassing. It was a homecoming. Leo, his earlier boredom completely forgotten, was alight with the thrill of exploration. His innocent excitement was a bright counterpoint to the weight of adult anxiety that had begun to settle on Clara's shoulders. "Mom, look!" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. He was pointing to a long wooden bench, its varnish cracked and peeling. It was the ticket bench, where countless passengers had waited, their tickets clutched in their hands. He ran over to another corner, his attention caught by something lying half-buried in a pile of debris. He knelt and carefully pulled it free. It was an old, leather-bound timetable, its pages thick and creamy, filled with the elegant script of a bygone era. "Mom, look!" he called again, his voice filled with wonder. "This train went to a place called Willow Creek. Do you think it's still there?" He traced the faded ink with his small finger, connecting the dots of forgotten towns and the schedules of long-departed trains. "I don't know, sweetie," Clara said, her voice soft. She came to stand behind him, looking over his shoulder at the map of a world that no longer existed. "Maybe we can find out." As Leo remained engrossed in the timetable, Clara wandered over to a section of the wall where a bulletin board still hung, miraculously intact. Tacked to its cork surface, faded and curled at the edges, was a single photograph. She gently worked the rusty thumbtack free and held the picture in her hand. It was a black and white image of a young soldier in a crisp uniform, his arms wrapped around a girl with a bright, hopeful smile. He was kissing her forehead, his eyes closed, a look of profound love and sorrow on his face. They were standing on this very platform. It was a moment of goodbye, frozen in time, a poignant, heartbreaking reminder of the countless stories that had unfolded within these walls. A sense of connection, deep and resonant, flowed through Clara. This wasn't just a building, it was a repository of human experience. As she stood there, holding the fragile photograph, a shift occurred within her. The anxieties about the leaky roof, the broken windows, and the mountain of work ahead began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She was no longer just a struggling single mother who had made a reckless purchase. She was a custodian, a keeper of stories. She looked around the vast, dusty hall, at her son tracing the journeys of ghosts, at their dog sniffing out the secrets of the past, and for the first time in a very long time, she saw not a ruin, but a future. A place not of endings, but of new beginnings. A place they could call home. The feeling of purpose, so new and fragile, propelled them forward. If this was to be their home, they needed to know every inch of it, every secret it held. They left the main hall, their exploration taking on a more focused, determined air. A series of doors lined the far wall, most of them featureless, their paint peeling to reveal the dark wood beneath. One, however, still bore a tarnished brass plaque, its lettering greened with age but still legible: Station Master. It felt like a door to the past, a direct link to the heart of the station's operations. Clara tried the handle, but it was frozen solid with rust and time. She was about to turn away, to mark it as another task for another day. But Leo, emboldened by their adventure, pushed past her. "Let me try, Mom." He wrapped both his small hands around the ornate knob and twisted with all his might. His face screwed up in concentration. With a sudden, sharp crack, the lock mechanism gave way. The door swung inward with a low groan, revealing a small, square office, a time capsule sealed for decades. The air that flowed out was thick and heavy, a complex perfume of decaying paper, dry leather, and the faint, ghostly scent of long-extinguished pipe tobacco. Everything was coated in a uniform, velvety layer of gray dust. A heavy oak desk stood against the far wall, a swivel chair before it, its leather upholstery cracked and split like a dry riverbed. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers slightly ajar, as if their last user had left in a hurry. It was a room full of ghosts, a place of quiet, forgotten industry. Buddy, however, was not interested in ghosts. His tail, which had been wagging tentatively, suddenly stiffened. His nose went to the floor, and with a low, excited whine, he pulled hard on the leash still looped around Leo's wrist. "Whoa, Buddy!" Leo yelped, stumbling forward. The Labrador was insistent, his powerful body straining, his attention fixed on a section of the wall paneled in dark, beadboard wood. He pawed at the base of the wall, sniffing frantically at a spot where one of the panels had warped, its edge curling away from its neighbors like a dry leaf. "What is it, boy?" Clara asked, her curiosity piqued by the dog's strange intensity. "Did you find a mouse?" "He wants something, Mom," Leo said, his eyes wide. He let the leash go slack and knelt, his small hands going to the warped wooden panel Buddy was so fixated on. He tugged at the curled edge. The wood was soft and splintered, but it held. It stuck. Clara knelt beside him, the crowbar still in her hand. A strange, prickling sensation ran up her arms, a current of anticipation that she couldn't explain. It was probably nothing, a rat's nest, a hollow space in the wall. But Buddy was still whining, a low, urgent sound, his nose pressed to the crack. "Let's see," she murmured, more to herself than to Leo. She carefully worked the tip of the crowbar into the seam above the warped panel and gently pried. There was a protesting squeal of old nails pulling free from dry wood, and the entire panel swung away from the wall as if on a hidden hinge. Leo gasped. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Behind the panel, where there should have been plaster and lath, was the dark, rusted face of a metal locker. It was old, built into the very structure of the wall, its surface pitted and streaked with corrosion. A heavy, unadorned handle was set into the door, thick and solid. It wasn't a locker for an employee's lunch. It was a safe. A surge of pure adrenaline, sharp and electric, shot through Clara. Her heart, which had just settled into a comfortable rhythm, began to hammer against her ribs again. This was impossible. This was the stuff of fantasy, of movies and paperback novels. Leo, free from the skepticism of adulthood, felt only the pure, unadulterated thrill of discovery. "A secret treasure chest," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. He reached out a tentative hand, touching the cold, rough metal. Clara's more cautious mind raced. It was probably empty, or filled with boring, indecipherable railroad records. Still, her hand was trembling as she reached for the handle. It was stiff, frozen by decades of disuse. She wrapped both hands around it and pulled. Nothing. It was locked, of course it was locked. A wave of disappointment, surprisingly sharp, washed over her. "Let me," Leo insisted, squeezing in beside her. Together, they wrapped their hands around the cold metal handle. "On three," Clara said, her voice tight. 1, 2, 3. They threw their combined weight into it, Buddy barking once, a sharp, encouraging sound. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning clang of metal on metal, the locking mechanism, defeated by their combined force and the slow, patient work of time, gave way. The heavy door swung open. A wave of musty, stale air. The smell of trapped time itself washed over them. They peered into the dark cavity. It wasn't empty. On the single metal shelf inside sat a neat stack of thick, manila envelopes, their color darkened to a deep ivory with age. They were bound together with a loop of what had once been bright red string, now faded to a dusty pink. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely function. She reached in and carefully, reverently, lifted the stack of envelopes out into the dim light of the office. They were heavier than they looked. She carried them over to the dusty desk, setting them down with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the profound silence of the room. Leo scrambled onto the cracked leather chair, his chin barely clearing the edge of the desk, his eyes fixed on the mysterious package. "Open it, Mom," he breathed, his voice a reverent whisper. "Please." Clara's fingers fumbled with the brittle, knotted string. It crumbled to dust beneath her touch. She picked up the top envelope. It was addressed to no one. There was no writing on it at all. It was sealed, the flap glued down tight. With a trembling finger, she worked at the corner, slowly tearing the paper. The sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She pulled back the flap and tilted the envelope. What slid out onto the dusty surface of the desk was not a letter. It was a thick sheaf of paper, intricately engraved with green and black ink. Clara picked one up. The paper was thick and crisp, a strange, unfamiliar texture. Across the top, in elegant, serious script, were the words, "The United States of America." She didn't understand. She read the dense text, her eyes catching on a single, unbelievable phrase. "Will pay to the bearer on demand, bearer bonds." She had read about them in novels, these strange, archaic financial instruments, a form of currency for a world of spies and secret fortunes, a relic from an era before digital transactions and government tracking. They were like cash, anonymous and untraceable, belonging to whoever physically held them. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "Is it real money, Mom?" Leo asked, his small voice cutting through the fog of her disbelief. "I think so, Leo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I think it's real." Her hands, now driven by a feverish energy, moved to the next envelope. She tore it open, and more bonds spilled out, these with different denominations, the numbers printed on them making her head spin. $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. They were dated from the 1930s and 40s, a lifetime ago. She opened another envelope, and then another. This one was different. It was filled with stacks of old silver certificates, paper money from a time when a dollar was a promise of actual silver. The bills were smaller than modern currency, their designs beautiful and ornate, featuring presidents and historical figures who looked stern and serious, as if they understood the gravity of the wealth they represented. Stack after stack, envelope after envelope, she laid the contents out on the desk, the growing piles of bonds and certificates covering the thick layer of dust, a treasure map of impossible wealth. It was a fortune, a king's ransom, hidden away in a forgotten office, in a forgotten train station, waiting. When the last envelope was empty, Clara stared at the unbelievable sight before her. It was too much to process. Her mind, accustomed to calculating grocery bills and stretching paychecks, simply refused to function on this scale. She took a deep, shuddering breath and forced herself to be methodical. She began to count, her whisper a strange, foreign sound in the silent room. She separated the bonds and the certificates by their denominations, her hands moving as if in a dream. The numbers grew, climbing to a height that was dizzying, terrifying. 100,000, 500,000, a million. The word itself felt unreal on her tongue. She counted again, her mind refusing to accept the result. Couldn't be right, but the paper was real. The ink was real. The sheer, physical weight of it all was undeniable. When she finally arrived at the final, staggering sum, she had to sit down, her legs giving way. She sank onto the floor, her back against the cold metal of a filing cabinet, and stared at the fortune spread across the desk. $3.7 million. A wave of shock, so profound it was almost painful, washed over her. It was a physical sensation, a cold tide that started in her stomach and spread through her entire body, leaving her numb and breathless. $3.7 million. The words echoed in the silent chambers of her mind. Nonsensical, impossible. It was a number she associated with lottery winners, with distant, glittering lives she saw on television. Not with herself. Not with Clara, who bought dented cans and day-old bread, who lay awake at night drowning in a sea of small, relentless debts. Then came the joy, a hysterical, bubbling wave of it that burst from her in a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Leo, startled, looked down at her from his perch on the chair. She held out her arms to him, and he slid off the chair and into her embrace. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his soft hair. The scent of him, so familiar and real, an anchor in the swirling vortex of her emotions. Their lives were changed, irrevocably, utterly. The constant, grinding weight of poverty, the fear that had been her shadow for so long, was gone. In its place was a new feeling, a dizzying, terrifying freedom. But beneath the joy, a colder emotion was already beginning to surface, a profound sense of fear and a crushing weight of responsibility. This much money wasn't just a solution. It was a problem, a secret that had to be kept, a treasure that had to be protected. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden fingers of light through the grimy office window, Clara knew one thing with absolute certainty. They couldn't leave. They couldn't just lock the door and drive away, leaving $3.7 million sitting on a dusty desk. The station, which hours ago had been a whimsical, reckless purchase, was now their vault, their fortress. Tonight it would be their home. She found the lantern she had packed in a box of supplies from their small apartment, a box filled with the pathetic, meager essentials she had deemed worthy of bringing on this first, exploratory trip. Its light, when she lit it, was a small, brave circle of warmth in the encroaching darkness of the cavernous main hall. The shadows it cast were immense and alive, dancing and stretching into the far corners of the vast space, turning the high, arched ceiling into a dark, unknowable sky. They sat together on the old ticket bench, the same one where countless travelers had waited for journeys to begin. Now it was the throne of their new, unbelievable kingdom. The envelopes, refilled with their impossible contents, were piled neatly between them, a tangible mountain of their new reality. For a long time they just sat in silence, the enormity of it all too vast for words. Then Leo giggled. It was a small, tentative sound at first, but it grew, bubbling up into a full, joyous laugh. The sound, so pure and alive, bounced off the high, dusty ceiling, chasing the ghosts from the rafters. It was a sound of life, of hope, of a future suddenly, miraculously rewritten. Clara looked at him, at the pure, uncomplicated happiness on his face, and she began to laugh too. It was a release, a catharsis, a sound of pure, unadulterated, hysterical joy. Their laughter echoed through the once silent hall, a symphony of disbelief and delight, a sound that promised that this place would no longer be a monument to goodbyes, but a testament to new beginnings. Buddy, who had been lying at their feet, seemed to sense the shift in the emotional atmosphere. He rested his great, gentle head on Clara's lap, his warm, solid presence a comforting anchor in the midst of their emotional whirlwind. She stroked his soft ears, her laughter slowly subsiding into a quiet, peaceful contentment. The wind whistled through the cracks in the old walls, a lonely, mournful sound that had seemed so sad just hours before. But now it sounded different. It no longer whispered of loss and decay. It whispered of change, of journeys, of possibilities. It felt as if the station itself was breathing with them, sharing in their secret. Clara picked up one of the bearer bonds, the paper cool and smooth against her fingertips. The flickering lantern light caught the intricate engravings, making them shimmer. This small piece of paper in her hand was worth more than she had earned in the last 5 years combined. The weight of their newfound wealth, which had felt so terrifying in the small, dusty office, began to feel less like a burden and more like a gift. It was a chance to build a new life, to give Leo the future he deserved, to restore this beautiful, forgotten place to its former glory. A sense of peace, deep and profound, settled over her, a feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The fear was still there, a dark shadow lurking just beyond the circle of their lantern's light. But for tonight, it was held at bay. Tonight, there was only the quiet joy, the boundless hope, and the whispering wind, promising that their journey had only just begun. The dawn that broke over the Crestwood station was the first of Clara's new life, and it was terrifying. The euphoria of the previous night had evaporated with the morning mist, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of their discovery. $3.7 million. The number was a monster, a mythical beast that had taken up residence in their lives, and she had no idea how to tame it. The bonds and certificates, now locked securely back in their metal box, which was in turn hidden again behind the warped wooden panel, felt like a ticking bomb. They were worthless as long as they remained a secret, but the act of revealing them felt like stepping off a cliff. After a sleepless night spent listening to the station's unfamiliar groans and the whisper of the wind, Clara knew she couldn't remain paralyzed by fear. Action was the only antidote. She needed to know if the fortune was real, if these pieces of antique paper held any true value in the modern world. The thought of walking into a bank, of placing her impossible story before the scrutinizing gaze of a professional, sent a wave of nausea through her. She felt like a fraud, an imposter. She looked at her reflection in a shard of broken mirror she'd found, at her worn jacket and the exhaustion etched around her eyes. Who would ever believe her? She decided to take only one of the bonds, a single $1,000 note from 1942. Felt safer a test run. If she was laughed out of the bank, if they called the police and accused her of forgery or theft, the loss would be manageable. The rest of the treasure would remain hidden, a secret shared only by her, her son, and a loyal brown dog. She tucked the bond into the inner pocket of her jacket, the crisp paper a secret weight against her heart. She told Leo she was going to the hardware store for supplies, a plausible lie that sat uneasily on her tongue. She left him in charge of Buddy, with a stern warning not to open the office door for any reason. His serious nod, the way he puffed out his chest and took his new responsibility to heart, was both endearing and heartbreaking. He was too young for secrets this heavy. The bank was a temple of modern commerce, all glass and polished steel and cool, conditioned air. It was a world away from the dusty, organic decay of the station. The quiet hum of computers and the soft, respectful murmur of voices felt alien. Clara felt every eye on her as she crossed the marble floor, her work boots seeming to thunder in the hallowed silence. She felt conspicuous, a stray weed in a manicured garden. She took a place in line, her heart hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. When her turn came, she approached the teller, a young woman with a bright, practiced smile. I need to speak with someone about an old bond, Clara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The teller's smile didn't falter. Of course, Mr. Davies, our branch manager, can help you with that. Please have a seat. Mr. Davies's office was a glass box that looked out over the main floor. He was a man in his late 50s, his suit immaculate, his hair a perfect silver helmet. He had a practiced smile, but his eyes were wary and intelligent, the eyes of a man who had seen every kind of scam and sob story. He gestured for Clara to sit, the plush chair sighing as she sank into it. "How can I help you today?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Clara's hands trembled as she reached into her jacket and pulled out the bond. She unfolded it carefully and laid it on the polished surface of his desk. "I was hoping you could tell me if this is real," she said, the words feeling foolish as they left her lips. Mr. Davies picked up the bond, his movements precise. He held it up to the light, his expression unreadable. He ran a finger over the engraving, his touch surprisingly gentle. The silence in the small office stretched, growing heavier with every second that passed. Clara felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. She was sure this was the moment he would press a silent alarm, that security guards would appear at the door. Instead, He laid the bond back on the desk and looked at her, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "It's real," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "It's a United States bearer bond, issued during the war. We don't see many of these anymore. It's in remarkable condition." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "These are quite old, Mrs. Thompson," Clara supplied, her voice tight. "Clara Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, may I ask how you came into possession of it?" The question she had been dreading. The lie she had rehearsed felt clumsy and transparent. "They were a family inheritance," she said, trying to sound casual, trying to meet his gaze without flinching. "My grandfather. He passed away a long time ago. We were cleaning out his old house and found a box of his things." Mr. Davies nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. He didn't believe her. She was sure of it. But it was a plausible enough story. A story that didn't require him to file any special paperwork. That, she was learning, was what mattered in a world of rules and regulations. "I see," he said. "Well, your grandfather had excellent foresight." He picked up a calculator. "The face value is $1,000, of course. But these bonds also accrue interest. Given that this was issued in 1942. He tapped at the keys, his brow furrowed in concentration. The soft clicking of the buttons was the only sound. "With the accrued, compounded interest over the last 80-plus years," he said finally, looking up at her. "This single bond is worth approximately $27,000 today." Clara's mind went blank. $27,000. For one piece of paper. She had counted the face value, the simple, staggering $3.7 million. She had never even considered interest. The monster in her train station had just grown exponentially. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "Mrs. Thompson? Are you all right?" Mr. Davies's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "Yes," she managed to say, her throat dry. "Yes, I'm fine. Just surprised." "I can imagine," he said, a hint of a genuine smile touching his lips. "It's not every day someone walks in with a winning lottery ticket from the 1940s. If you have more of these, I would strongly advise you to seek professional financial and legal counsel. An inheritance of this nature can have complex tax implications." His words, meant to be helpful, were a fresh wave of terror. Lawyers, taxes, the government. The simple, secret joy of their discovery was becoming tangled in a web of terrifying adult responsibilities. She thanked him, her voice a reedy whisper, and practically fled from the office. The bond, now confirmed as a small fortune in its own right, clutched in her hand. As she hurried across the marble floor, she felt a new kind of fear, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The fear of being watched. Her newfound wealth, even the hint of it, felt like a scent, a trail that would lead predators to her door. Her unease proved prophetic. 2 days later, as she and Leo were clearing debris from the platform, a sleek black car, so out of place it looked like a spaceship, crunched its way up the gravel lane. Clara's heart froze in her chest. She knew that car. She knew the man who was now emerging from the driver's side, his silver hair glinting in the afternoon sun. It was Mr. Henderson. He stood for a moment, taking in the scene, a slow, proprietary smile spreading across his face. He saw the piles of cleared rubbish, the newly swept section of the platform, the life they were trying to breathe back into the place. His gaze lingered on Clara, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth and laced with a false, condescending warmth. "Look at you, the little homesteader." Clara instinctively put an arm in front of Leo, who had frozen, his small shovel still in his hand. Buddy, sensing the shift in his owner's demeanor, let out a low, rumbling growl from deep in his chest, the fur along his spine bristling. "What do you want, Mr. Henderson?" Clara's voice was colder and steadier than she felt. He chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. He walked towards them, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. "I heard a rumor," he said, stopping a few feet away. "A funny little rumor. About a lucky lady who found a little surprise in her new, dilapidated house. You know how small towns are. People talk. Clara's blood ran cold. The bank. It had to be the bank. Someone had talked. "You've been a very lucky woman, Clara," Henderson continued, his voice dropping, the false warmth replaced by a hard, menacing edge. "But that luck is about to run out. You see, that money is rightfully mine." Clara stared at him, her disbelief momentarily overriding her fear. "What are you talking about? I bought the station. The deed is in my name." "You bought the building," he corrected her, taking a step closer. "A pile of bricks and mortar, which I graciously allowed you to have for a pittance. But the contents? The assets left on the property. According to the law, those revert to the auction. And since my initial bid of $10 was the only other serious offer, that makes them mine." It was a lie, a preposterous, transparent lie, but he said it with such unshakable confidence that a seed of doubt, of pure terror, took root in Clara's heart. What if he was right? What if she had celebrated too soon? "I'm a reasonable man," he said, his voice becoming smooth and conciliatory again. He was playing with her, a cat with a cornered mouse. "I'm prepared to be generous. I'll give you $100,000. A finder's fee, let's call it. You walk away with a nice little nest egg, and I take my property. Everyone's happy. $100,000. A week ago, that sum would have been a miracle, a life-altering fortune. Now it was an insult. It was a fraction, a crumb from the feast that was rightfully hers. And in that moment, something inside Clara snapped. The fear, the exhaustion, the years of being pushed around and underestimated. It all coalesced into a single, hard point of pure, unadulterated rage. She looked him straight in the eye, her own gaze unwavering. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now wrapped in a newfound, protective strength. "You had your chance, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice firm and clear, ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "The station is mine, and so is everything in it." Henderson's smile vanished. His face hardened, the mask of civility dropping away to reveal the raw, ugly greed beneath. "You're making a big mistake, little lady," he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will drag you through court until you have nothing left. I will take this station, I will take that money, and I will leave you with nothing but the dust you paid for." He turned on his heel and stalked back to his car, the violent slam of his door echoing through the quiet afternoon. As the black car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, Clara stood frozen, her arms still protectively in front of her son. Leo, sensing the tension, had not moved a muscle. He now looked up at her, his small hand finding hers and clutching it tightly. The warmth of his grip, the solid, trusting weight of it, brought her back to herself. She had stood up to the monster, but she knew, with a chilling certainty, that he would be back. The battle for the station, for their future, had just begun. She realized, with a sinking heart, that they would have to fight to protect their newfound fortune. The days that followed were shrouded in a new kind of anxiety. Every passing car on the lane made Clara's heart leap into her throat. Every unfamiliar sound was Henderson's return. The joy of their discovery was tainted. The money no longer a simple gift but a source of conflict, a target on their backs. The station, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt exposed, vulnerable. She couldn't do this alone. Mr. Davies's advice echoed in her mind, a professional financial and legal counsel. Finding a lawyer was a daunting task. It was another world she didn't belong to, a world of retainers and billable hours that she couldn't possibly afford, or so she thought. She looked through the local directory, the names of law firms seeming formal and intimidating. She finally chose one not for its prestigious name, but for its location in a modest, older brick building that reminded her a little of the station. Albright and Associates. It sounded approachable. The office was nothing like the bank. It was filled with the comforting smell of old books and lemon polish. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the walls lined with shelves groaning under the weight of thick, leather-bound law books. Felt like a place of wisdom, of history. Ms. Albright herself was a woman in her 60s, with kind, intelligent eyes behind a pair of stylish glasses and a cloud of white hair pinned loosely on her head. She listened to Clara's story, her expression calm and attentive, her hands steepled under her chin. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, a small, encouraging nod here and there prompting Clara to continue. For the first time, Clara told the whole story, from the $11 bid to the discovery in the station master's office, to the confrontation with Mr. Henderson. She laid it all out, the impossible, unbelievable truth. When she was finished, a nervous silence filled the room. She waited for the disbelief, the judgment. Instead, Ms. Albright smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "My dear," she said, her voice calm and reassuring, "you have had quite an adventure." A wave of relief so profound it almost made Clara weep washed over her. She was believed. She had an ally. "First," Ms. Albright said, her tone becoming more businesslike, "let's address Mr. Henderson's ridiculous claim. He is, to use the legal term, full of hot air. The principle of treasure trove and laws regarding found property are complex, but in this case, the contents were abandoned within a property that you legally purchased. Your claim to that money is solid. He's trying to intimidate you, to bully you into giving up what is rightfully yours." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "That being said, he is a very wealthy and a very litigious man. He can, and likely will, make things difficult for you. He can tie you up in court, drain your resources, and make your life miserable in the hopes that you will eventually break and accept a lowball settlement. We need to be prepared for that." Clara's heart sank. "But I don't have any resources to drain. That money is all I have, and I can't even touch it. We can arrange for the bonds to be placed in an escrow account, managed by a third party, pending the outcome of any legal challenges," Ms. Albright explained. "And as for my fee, don't you worry about that for a moment. I'll take your case on contingency. That means I only get paid if we win, and I have every intention of winning." The lawyer's confidence was a balm to Clara's frayed nerves. For the first time since Henderson's visit, she felt a flicker of hope. "So what do? "We go on the offensive," Ms. Albright said, a determined glint in her eye. "We will file a petition for quiet title, a legal action that will ask a judge to declare, officially and irrevocably, that you are the sole and rightful owner of the assets found in the station. It will force Henderson to either put up a legitimate legal claim, which he does not have, or shut up permanently." The daunting realization of the long and difficult road ahead settled on Clara, but it was no longer a terrifying, lonely path. She had a guide, a champion. As she left the lawyer's office, the heavy weight on her shoulders felt lighter. The fight was far from over, but now it felt winnable. She walked back to her car, the setting sun casting a warm, golden glow on the old brick buildings of the town, and felt a sense of purpose solidifying within her. She was not just fighting for the money. She was fighting for her home, for her son's future, and for the quiet, determined woman she was finally discovering herself to be. The filing of the quiet title petition was a quiet, legal maneuver, a piece of paper filed in a dusty courthouse, but its ripples spread through the small town of Crestwood with the speed of summer gossip. The story, which had been a whispered rumor, was now a matter of public record, and it was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. A single mother, a dilapidated train station bought for $11, and a hidden fortune from a bygone era. It was the kind of story that belonged in a movie, not in their sleepy, forgotten town. At first, there was skepticism. But then, the local newspaper, a small weekly publication, ran a front-page story. It was a sympathetic piece, painting Clara as a plucky heroine and Mr. Henderson as the villainous tycoon he was widely considered to be. The article was shared on social media, and the story took on a life of its own. It was a modern-day fairy tale, a story of hope and luck and the underdog fighting back. And the people of Crestwood, who had watched their town slowly fade over the decades, who had seen too many historic buildings fall to the wrecking ball, decided they wanted to be a part of it. The first to arrive was a man named George, a retired railroad engineer in his late 70s with hands as gnarled as old oak roots. He showed up one morning in a dusty pickup truck, a dented metal toolbox rattling in the back. He found Clara on the platform, sweeping away a generation of dirt. "You're the one," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. It wasn't a question. "The one who's saving the old girl." He gestured with his chin towards the station. "I worked here, you know, back in the 60s. I was just a kid, a brakeman. This place, it was alive then." Clara, wary at first, saw the genuine emotion in his watery blue eyes. "I'm trying," she said. "Trying's not enough," he grunted, but there was no malice in it. He walked to his truck and came back with his toolbox. "You're gonna need help." He set the box down with a heavy thud. The plumbing in the station master's office was always tricky. Let's start there. He was the first drop in what soon became a steady rain of support. A young couple, artists who had recently moved to town, arrived with paintbrushes and a vision for a mural on the waiting room wall. A retired librarian, a woman with a fierce love for books, offered to help organize the old records and perhaps start a small community library in one of the empty rooms. A high school shop teacher came by with 3 of his most promising students, offering to repair the intricate woodwork on the ticket counter as a class project. The silence of the station was broken. The lonely echo of Clara's footsteps was replaced by the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on wood, the cheerful clang of hammers, the low hum of conversation, and, most wonderfully, the sound of laughter. The air, once thick with the smell of decay, now carried the clean, hopeful sense of sawdust, fresh paint, and brewing coffee. The station was coming back to life, not just as a building, but as the heart of a community that was rediscovering itself. Clara was overwhelmed, humbled, and profoundly grateful. She had been a solitary fighter for so long, and the instinct to do everything herself was deeply ingrained. But she learned slowly to accept the offered help, to delegate, to trust. She moved from being the station's sole guardian to its grateful custodian, the quiet center of a whirlwind of goodwill. She made lists, organized work crews, and spent her days covered in a fine layer of dust, a smile rarely leaving her face. Leo was in heaven. The station, his magical castle, was now filled with a rotating cast of fascinating new friends. He followed George around like a shadow, listening with rapt attention to stories of steam engines and hobos. He helped the artists by fetching them water, his small hands smudged with a rainbow of paint. He became the official tour guide for new volunteers, proudly pointing out the hidden locker, which was now empty, its secret shared and its power transformed. Buddy, their loyal Labrador, became the station's official mascot and head of security, greeting every new arrival with a furiously wagging tail and a happy bark, his presence a constant, joyful thread weaving through the tapestry of their new life. The treasure was no longer a terrifying secret locked in a metal box. It was a catalyst, a spark that had ignited the dormant spirit of a town. The day of the court hearing arrived like a cold front, a stark, gray reality against the warm, vibrant backdrop of the station's revival. The cheerful sounds of renovation were replaced by the oppressive silence of the courtroom. It was a formal, intimidating space, all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make one feel small and insignificant. Clara sat beside Ms. Albright at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, a gift from one of the volunteers. She felt a small crowd of her new friends behind her, a silent, supportive presence that gave her strength. George was there, and the artist couple and the librarian. Their being there meant more to her than they could ever know. Across the aisle, Mr. Henderson sat with his team of 3 sharp-suited lawyers. He looked relaxed, confident, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. He caught Clara's eye and gave her a look of condescending pity, a look that said, "Did you really think you could win?" A shiver of the old fear ran through her, but she met his gaze, her expression calm, and held it until he looked away. The proceedings began, and Henderson's lead lawyer, a man with a voice as smooth and cold as river stone, laid out their case. He used a lot of complicated legal jargon, citing obscure precedents and twisting the facts. But the core of his argument was the same lie Henderson had told Clara at the station. The money was an abandoned asset, he argued, which should have reverted to the auction, and as the only other bidder, his client had the primary claim. He painted Clara as a naive opportunist who had stumbled into a windfall she didn't deserve. Then it was Ms. Albright's turn. She stood, and her presence seemed to fill the room. She was not loud or aggressive. She was calm, methodical, and utterly prepared. She presented the signed deed of sale, a simple, powerful piece of evidence. She spoke of property law in clear, simple terms that anyone could understand. Mr. Henderson did not bid on the contents of the station, she stated, her voice ringing with clarity. He bid on the land, which he openly and contemptuously described as a pile of bricks and pigeon droppings. He had his chance to purchase Lot 37, and he chose not to. My client, Mrs. Thompson, did. She bought the property, as is, where is, and that includes everything within its walls, from the pigeons in the rafters to the treasure in the floorboards. She then called George to the stand. In his simple, honest words, he described the station as it was, and the work they were all doing to save it. He spoke of Clara's dedication, of the community she had inspired. He wasn't a lawyer, but his testimony was more powerful than any legal argument. He was painting a picture of what was at stake, not just money, but history, community, and a second chance for a forgotten piece of their town. The judge, a woman named Carol Brewer with a reputation for being both wise and tough, listened to it all, her expression unreadable. She had seen men like Henderson before, men who believed their wealth entitled them to whatever they wanted. Finally, she cleared her throat. The room fell utterly silent. Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the tension. It is the opinion of this court that your claim is not only without legal merit, but that it is also frivolous and predatory. Henderson's smug smile evaporated. A dull red flush crept up his neck. You are a man of considerable means, the judge continued, her eyes fixed on him. You could have purchased this property for a pittance. You chose to mock it instead. Mrs. Thompson saw not a ruin, but a piece of history, a place of value. She took a risk you were unwilling to take. The law does not reward cynical greed, Mr. Henderson. It rewards ownership. And Mrs. Thompson is the undisputed owner of the Crestwood Station and all of its contents. She banged her gavel, the sound a sharp, final crack that echoed in the silent room. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Clara Thompson. The petition for quiet title is granted. Mr. Henderson's claim is dismissed with prejudice. This matter is closed. A collective sigh of relief, followed by a quiet murmur of approval, rippled through the spectators. Clara felt the tension drain out of her in a dizzying rush. It was over. They had won. Tears, not of sorrow or fear, but of pure, unadulterated relief and triumph, welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. Ms. Albright squeezed her hand, her own eyes shining. Across the aisle, Mr. Henderson's face was a mask of cold, impotent fury. He had been defeated, his arrogance and his greed laid bare for all to see. As he and his lawyers gathered their papers and swept out of the courtroom, Clara felt a profound sense of justice, of vindication. The monster had been vanquished. The celebration that marked the grand reopening of the Crestwood Station, 3 months later, was not a fancy gala. There were no champagne flutes or black ties. Instead, the great hall was filled with the warm, delicious smells of a community potluck. Long tables, built by the high school shop class, groaned under the weight of casseroles, salads, and homemade pies. The mural on the waiting room wall was finished, a vibrant, swirling depiction of the station's history, from steam engines to the smiling faces of the volunteers who had brought it back to life. Where there had been silence, there was now the lively sound of a local bluegrass band, their music echoing through the restored space. The station was no longer just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, a vibrant community center for the people of Crestwood. The old ticket office was now a small library, curated by the retired librarian. The station master's office was a quiet space for meetings and tutoring. The vast main hall was a place for art shows, concerts, and town gatherings. Clara moved through the crowd, no longer a struggling, invisible single mother, but a respected and beloved community leader. She was not the same woman who had walked into the auction room all those months ago. The fear and exhaustion had been replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that radiated from her. She had used a portion of the money to fund the renovations and to establish a trust for the station's ongoing maintenance. But more importantly, she had invested herself, her time, and her heart. She saw Leo, running through the hall with a pack of new friends, their laughter the sweetest music she had ever heard. He was no longer the quiet, anxious boy who clutched a teddy bear for comfort. He was bright, happy, and confident, at home in the magical kingdom he had helped to save. As the evening wound down and the sun began to set, casting long, golden shafts of light through the newly glazed arched windows, Clara found herself sitting on the old ticket bench, the same one where she and Leo had spent their first, unbelievable night. Buddy, ever loyal, came and rested his great head on her lap, his tail thumping a soft, contented rhythm against the polished wood. A moment later, Leo scrambled up onto the bench beside her, his face flushed with happiness. He leaned against her, his small body warm and solid. He looked around the beautiful, bustling hall, at the people talking and laughing, at the warm light glowing on the newly polished floors. "Mom, look," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound awe. "We did it. We saved the station." Clara smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close, and kissed the top of his head. Tears of pure joy pricked at her eyes. "Yes, we did, sweetie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it together." She looked around the hall, at the community they had built, at the lives they had touched, and realized the profound truth of it all. The $3.7 million had been the key, the catalyst, but it had never been the real treasure. The real treasure was this feeling of belonging, of purpose. It was the laughter of her son, the warmth of her dog, the friendship of her neighbors. It was the second chance they had given not just to a building but to a town and to themselves. They sat there together, mother, son, and dog, as the last of the setting sun's rays painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The sound of the wind still whistled through the tracks outside, a lonely, timeless sound. But it no longer whispered of goodbyes or forgotten things. It whispered of journeys, of connections, of life. It whispered that their own journey, the one that had started with a desperate $11 bid, had only just begun.